Thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to host this panel on cities and the sharing economy. The most important thing that you need to know is that the internet is not working. However, we really want you to tweet, and we encourage you to use your own data to do it. Please make sure you include the hashtag #ShareLab in all your tweets. As you know, cities have been the main character since the beginning of the century. Everybody's talking about cities. You lift a rock and somebody says something about smart cities. There are a lot of conferences, smart cities, and so on. And the main discourse is we are a lot of people, and a huge percentage of us are increasingly moving to cities. And according to a lot of different statistics, around 60–70% of the global population will live in cities in the next decades. Of course, that creates a lot of opportunities, and that also creates a lot of challenges. The idea of the smart city emerged like the great solution to a lot of these challenges: how to manage transportation, energy consumption, food waste, and so on. And the concept of the smart city was, well, if we put a sensor in absolutely everything, then we can collect a lot of data and make smart decisions about how to manage the city. For the first 5 to 10 years of the 2000s, the discourse was that. And it led to a lot of technology-led solutions to city problems. But often we realized that there hasn't been really the solution to most of our challenges. And that in many cases, the idea of the smart city and smart solutions has left citizens aside of the processes involved in city making and taking care of our challenges. In the last 5 years, the good thing is that new approaches to making cities more resilient and smarter have emerged. And some of these are often related to the idea of sharing. Sharing and collaborating and putting citizens back in the center of city making are more often taken forward by city councils and startups and so on. And we can see the emergence of models like the sharing city in Seoul, Milano, where the city council is strongly supporting the emergence of a sharing economy and fostering sharing practices like school children sharing books and stuff at school, but also using Creative Commons licenses to also share data and so on. We've seen this sharing model taken forward in Milano and in Amsterdam, and today we are going to hear a little bit about that. We have the co-city model that the mayor of Bologna has introduced to all of us, and it's fascinating because it focuses on how citizens can contribute to making their cities better, and it focuses on the commons, this broadly accessible capital. Also, there are new models like the Fab City initiative that Liz is going to talk about, and it's a little bit more focused on how maker practices and distributed production manufacturing can transform cities, taking them from a model where we import a lot of products and produce a lot of trash into models where cities collaborate and create new solutions to urban challenges and share the data to now enable other territories to take them up. Now, we often, when we hear about the sharing economy in cities, we tend to hear about the very reactive approaches that cities are taking to control Airbnb and Uber. And we don't often hear about the broader ecosystem of sharing and collaboration that happens in cities, and is really making cities livable places and creating more inclusion and so on. So the aim of this panel is that with the amazing speakers that we have here today, we can inspire new ideas relating to the broader concept of collaborating and sharing in cities, share examples, and hopefully imagine how collaboration and in the broader sense can put citizens back to the center of the equation and make our cities much better. Of course, that has challenges, and we're also going to discuss them, but there are many opportunities, and it's worth being inspired by those who are taking those opportunities forward. So our first speaker is Finn Williams. Finn is an architect, but he's also has some experience in planning. He's been working, he works at the GLA, and he's going to be talking about a very interesting initiative that is the crowdfunding initiative taken forward by the Mayor of London. And this, of course, is quite disruptive because it's about new ways of funding initiatives in a much more distributed and transparent way. So, Finn, thank you very much.
Hi. So I want to start with a tweet from back in 2011 when @MT tweeted at the mayor of Detroit that Philadelphia has a statue of Rocky and RoboCop would kick Rocky's butt. And that the city of Detroit should build a statue of RoboCop. And, you know, Mayor Bing dutifully tweeted back, or probably someone who works for him, there are not any plans to erect a statue to RoboCop, but thank you for the suggestion. And what started as a joke became a crowdfunding campaign and went viral and had backers from around the world, reached its target, and sure enough, RoboCop was built. But 5 years later, it's still sitting in a warehouse on the outskirts of Detroit, and partly because it couldn't get permissions from the city of Detroit to build it. And for me, you know, a lot of you will have heard this story, but for me, it's an important one because it stands for all the potential and the problems with crowdfunding. It's an incredibly powerful mechanism to harness citizens' collective enterprise, but the cogs are often completely disconnected from the cogs of government. And of course, now fundamentally, there's nothing really democratic about crowdfunding. If anything, there's a risk that it can undermine government and reinforce inequality. So that's really why we started getting involved in crowdfunding. We were interested in rather than being outflanked by crowdfunding, trialing how the GLA could engage with it in a way that starts to connect up those cogs. So we worked with Space Hive to develop this sort of adapt and adopt their online platform, which now looks something like this. And the way it works is that we put out an open call for ideas to community groups, not-for-profit groups. They propose projects. We pledge up to £20,000 to the projects that meet our criteria across specific themes. They crowdfund the rest. If they hit their target, we help them begin delivery. And so far, we've allocated a very small amount to an initial pilot with the idea of scaling it up, £1.3 million over 4 rounds. We're between round 3 and 4, and this is an iterative process where we're learning and developing at every stage. So the kind of projects we funded are everything from a cafe that helps homeless people gain skills in catering and get jobs, to a street market, a night market that helps people from the local council estate start up their business for the first time. In fact, we've so far funded 53 projects out of 191 submissions. We've pledged 765k so far at that 1.3 million, and the crowd has raised over 1.2 million on top of that, but of course put in much more social capital and sweat equity on top of that. And that's from over 5,700 individual people, individual businesses all across London. And the success rate of projects we've backed has been 95%. I think that compares with about 47% on Space Hive, broadly speaking 25% on all crowdfunding platforms internationally. And we've seen the amount we get for each pound we pledge ramp up per round, so from £1.17 to £1.60 to £1.80. But we've learned a lot along the way. We're still learning. So I just thought I'd talk about a few of those things we've learned. The real involvement, the real value, rather, of the involvement of city government in this process for us has been the credibility of having the mayor's backing. So it's the kind of legitimisation more than the money that really catalyses support and unlocks other approvals. And we found ourselves moving from a situation where where people are competing for our funding to a situation where we're competing to fund people. where there are many other potential backers, we're having to look again at our processes for funding from the user's perspective and really question the kind of strings that we'd normally attach to grant funding. This sort of adjustment of the cogs of internal GLA processes to align with crowdfunding has meant that the programme has become a kind of Trojan horse for organisational change within the GLA. That's meant doing things like digitising our legal agreements as tick boxes as opposed to kind of paper documents you have to put sealing wax on, or a more flexible approach to due diligence requirements, or using the scrutiny of the crowd as a kind of alternative mechanism to monitoring and reporting, where instead of filling out endless Excel spreadsheets, it might be just putting out a blog. The GLA, I guess, traditionally would treat a £10,000 grant in the same way that we treat a £1 million grant in terms of risk. And if anything, we might see a small grant to a community group as more risky than a big grant to a council. But we've shown that a bit like microfinance, it's actually less risky to spread our bets across lots of smaller projects. So a portfolio approach has allowed us to be more proportional in terms of the risks that we take, but also allow more experiment on an individual project-by-project basis. If one fails, the programme still continues. I guess the real value of it hasn't necessarily just been all those 53 individual projects that have been built. It's really been the capacity that we've started to build amongst community groups in London, and not only what they do now, but what they go on to do, how they look after those spaces, how they go on to propose more projects. One of the things that's really surprised us in terms of delivery has been really how effective this model is. So our traditional model of funding a few large projects means that all of the spend as well as the outcomes tend to be backloaded towards the end of the project, if you imagine it over time. But by breaking down what we would have spent on one project to 53, 100 projects, we're seeing delivery a lot further up, further up front. So actually this year we've got more money out the door on £215,000 worth of these micro projects than we have £19 million worth of large regeneration projects. And we're interested in, actually going back to that, we're interested in how we can start to scale that up. So we're looking beyond the pilot at funding more projects, a broader range of community groups, a larger scale, and crucially different types of projects as well. So if you look at housing, a quarter of London's supply of housing is on small sites under 0.25 hectares. That's the ones on the far left there. But because those one-size-fits-all processes the public sector has to go through are just as complex for smaller sites as larger sites, and because we're all under massive constraint in terms of resources in the public sector, we tend to focus our resources on, and think it's more cost-effective to concentrate on the larger sites on the right-hand end of the scale. But by doing this, we're unwittingly exacerbating a trend where the number of homes built on small sites in London over the past 10 years has roughly halved. And actually that's matched by a reduction in the number of small house builders in London, which also has roughly halved in the last 10 years. If these trends continue, we simply won't be able to reach our housing targets because so much of our housing needs to be delivered on small sites. So through the London Land Commission, we've started to map all the land and public ownership. We're in the process of analysing how much capacity there is for housing on these small sites. And these are the kind of scrappy sites that are in the bottom of the drawer for local authorities, the last ones that they'd come to if they've identified them at all in the first place. Collectively, however, they can make a real difference. So we're interested in how you could almost crowdsource where those sites are, by asking SME developers, community-led housing groups, where through an online platform where they'd like to develop and create a central streamlined process to lease the sites to small developers and community groups at scale. So a bit like the crowdfunding programme, we hope that the real benefit here will be building the capacity of small builders to contribute homes to London's housing supply, whether on public sector land or private sector land. So finally, if I had one takeaway, which I was asked to give you, is that the public sector needs to challenge our default mode of delivering a few large projects and use technology to turn that dynamic on its head from a kind of bureaucratic model to a kind of plurocracy. So we're investing the same resource in many minor projects can collectively make a much greater scale of impact. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Finn. So our next speaker is Liz Corbin. Liz is a PhD researcher at the Institute of Making at UCL, and she is very much advocating for a maker culture at the local and international levels. And she's been collaborating with the Fab City Global Initiative for a while now. So she's here today to speak a little bit more about this global initiative and the Maker Mile, which is the local chapter of the Fab City Initiative in London. Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
Hi, everyone. Finn started with RoboCop, and I'm going to start with Marie. Because a Wimbledon tennis ball, believe it or not, travels 50,571 miles across 12 countries and 4 continents before game day. And this is pretty indicative of how we make much of what we consume today. The simplest of objects, traveling vast distances only to be consumed in the matter of minutes. Modern manufacturing is defined by global supply chains and the production of vast quantities irregardless of real demand. And your roles as citizens within this is to simply go to the local supermarket or convenience store and to choose from whatever's on offer. You have very limited power to engage in this system beyond that of passive consumption. This is a method of production that's causing detrimental long-term impact on the ecological systems of our planet, and one that desperately needs to be redesigned. Luckily, history is repeating itself. And a bit like the printing press in the Renaissance and steam-powered machinery in the Industrial Revolution, today, new technologies are disrupting traditional production practices. And it's giving us a chance to reimagine what, how, and where we make things. Personal computation and the internet is enabling us to produce content in a distributed way. We can now easily digitize and share the recipes for how to produce things with one another internationally, given the internet. At the very same time, the tools for production are becoming more and more distributed as well. And access to it is increasing, so we can now make things closer to home again. What all this means is that we can begin to define production based upon access to information and tools, rather than it being dictated by a quite small number of very, very large companies. Fab City is a new global initiative calling for locally productive, globally connected, self-sufficient cities. So far, 16 cities across the world have signed up, each pledging to produce at least 50% of what that city consumes by 2054. The initiative proposes a new urban model that shifts the way cities source and use materials from products in, trash out, to data in, data out, moving a city away from the current system of importing goods and producing trash to a circular ecosystem where materials and production flow within a city, and it's information on how things are made that circulates globally. This can be facilitated by developing distributed production ecosystems within our cities that do 2 things. Firstly, more smartly match the needs of a city with the production capacity of a city by connecting both citizens and local industry to collaborative platforms and giving them access to tools. And secondly, more efficiently capturing the waste within a city and redistributing it in a way that it becomes raw material again. So one way to practically approach this massive task is to take the culture found within open fabrication spaces and scale it to the city. In the past 10 years, make spaces and fab labs have popped up all over the world. In London alone, there are over 50. These are not just physical spaces of 3D printers, but of a whole suite of machines, and more importantly, of people that can help you make almost anything. These spaces connect with one another and share information through global networks, and that's acting almost like a massive distributed brain for prototyping new ways to make things. Within a city, they can become a new type of urban infrastructure that can be embedded within a city to enable both citizens to make more things for themselves as well as for sites of local industry to connect and participate within the development of distributed manufacturing networks that meet citywide needs. So for the past year, myself and my colleagues have been sort of exploring what a Fab City narrative for London could look like by basing ourselves in what's now being dubbed the Maker Mile. Someone's done a really nice logo, it wasn't me. So the Maker Mile is a diverse local industrial economy of manufacturers, material suppliers, design houses, make spaces, practitioners, workshops, running along Mare Street between Bethnal Green and London Fields in East London. And for us, it's become a test bed in order to explore the capacities and challenges of delivering distributed production systems within the city. Specifically, we've been really interested in understanding what types of collaborative infrastructure, both online and offline, enable distributed production and to what effect. So with OpenDesk and its online platform, we've been able to see how new business models can support and be supported by local demand and local production. Given a collaboration between Machines Room, which is a makespace, and a New Direction, we saw the ability to successfully deliver vocational training for local young people identified as NEET. And my favorite, by taking the plastic waste produced by local cafes and connecting that to the design talent of local design houses and the machines which are available at Machines Room, we were able to prove that it's actually possible to locally recapture waste and turn it into new materials and new products. So now we're in a bit of a point of reflection, and these are some of the top questions that we're asking ourselves. We've got a long list of them, but Mara asked me to end with a few questions. So things that we're going to be looking to explore further in the near future are still, again, collaborative infrastructure, but not just what it looks like, but what type of co-production models can exist so that we can avoid proprietary ownership, which I think we've all seen as being problematic in the past. We're also really interested in how planning measures can accommodate space for productive activity in a city, but we want to explore what that type of space looks like. Is it an industrial estate, or is it something that happens closer to the high street? We're not really sure, and it's probably a hybrid model of the two. We're also really interested in testing what actually can be made locally now and in the near future, as well as what might we not ever be able to make, or what's undesirable to be made. So we have a new company trying to 3D print pharmaceuticals in East London. Is that desirable, or is that a bit scary? We're not really sure yet. So I'll end now by mentioning that we are holding an event in January to discuss how to take this work forward. So if anyone's interested in getting involved, come and chat to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. Our next speaker is Femke Haccoû. She is the Urban Innovation Officer from the city of Amsterdam. She has a very interesting job because what she does is create collaborations between researchers, innovators, city council people, and civic organizations to develop and test and scale up innovative solutions for urban challenges. So she's going to give us an overview of what of the Amsterdam approach to smartening cities through the sharing economy. Thank you, Femke.
Thank you for having me. About the city perspective on what the role of city government is in the future, because so many things are happening rapidly. I'm honored to be here at Share Lab because Amsterdam, as in 2015, Share NL, our partner in crime, announced Amsterdam as a sharing city. And we were honored because in Amsterdam we have a lot of startups, we have a lot of collaborative settings where a lot of people are working together, as well as public, private, knowledge institutes, but also the citizens, to become a pleasant city to live in. And that sharing economy is actually something that is just out there already. And this is just a bunch of platforms that are hosted also in our city. And you already heard Dan speaking about Peerby, which we are really proud of, because these are the initiatives we love to see. And talking about the social impact and the sustainable impact next to all the commercial things we also talked about, of course. It's really interesting to reflect upon the role of city government, because what's a sharing city? Cities have been sharing their entire lives, probably, because if you can see public space as a shared space, because we all use it, then public schools are also there, and public libraries are there. So actually city government is sharing their entire life. So there is nothing new in that sense. Only the possibilities that this new digital economy and this disruption gives us, that needs to reflect upon our role as city government as well. And actually, if you see what's a sharing city, public sharing compared to the ask and demand of the private sector, there's nothing really strange about that. It only gets really interesting if you can see that the public sector is collaborating with private partners, and the private sector wants to contribute to the public sector. And this is a really interesting paradigm we're in at the moment. And we are all trying to work together. And Liz already talked about the more distributed model we are also in right now. We're not talking about centralized models anymore. There's no one-man king and rules it all, luckily. But we're all in one web where every voice is heard, and everybody can contribute to new initiatives in the streets, if it's concerning crowdfunding, like Finn was talking about, or just being a part of your local community, or on a global fan club of, I don't know, knitting or something. You know, everything is all connected. This is something we embrace, and I think this is something we cannot ignore anymore. Amsterdam, sharing city, the statement of our city is really to encourage these sharing initiatives, because it touches so many people and it creates so much extra potential for a lot of people to be more in touch with each other, more in touch with their city, more in touch with maybe health or happiness. But we have to do that on a proactive matter, on a proactive way, not to be just responsive to what is happening, but really try to understand it by participating in it as well. We are open-minded towards this disruption which is happening, because it also reflects upon us. Our role is to keep it fair for everybody. And that's a task on itself, because it's, well, that only talking about data is already a challenge on its own. So we are in the balance between what to protect and how to protect, and what to enable, and for who to enable what. And actually that attitude we love to share with a lot of people. And a lot of cities around the world as well, and I'll come back to that later on. Why would we stimulate? Well, in this audience, I think I will just get to this really quickly, because, well, we've talked about sustainability and making more efficient use of products and services, so on. We want to encourage innovation in entrepreneurship and stimulate startups like Peerby and Dan to be a B Corp, and what that means for business in general. But also just my neighbor who loves to cook some really great soup, I meant. But to see how this social impact reflects upon people. Because smart cities can only be smart cities if there are smart cities, citizens in them. And if we can make it possible to increase that social capital and make it also measurable in a way, because it's not about just money anymore, it's about impact. So we foresee a lot of challenges, of course. Next to stimulating that for the sharing economy on its own, we also would love to stimulate the social inclusiveness. Because getting in to work together and to be able to find each other and to encourage each other, that is where cities are built upon. The online connection is really important, of course, sustainable and fair. I'm just keeping saying it fair because that's maybe our biggest challenge and our role as a city. Agreeing on an open and transparent data exchange, and of course within legal borders, it's really important. And because we can ask for some data, but sometimes we cannot ask for data. And some people, offices can ask us as human beings for data, but well, we don't have to give it. And there are certain levels on exchanging data where we have to think on how we do it and how we design it. Also in this sharing economy. Learn about how our role is changing and actually can be adapted to this new situation. What is public and what is private in this sharing economy? Is a car in public? I need to speed up. Is a car maybe public? And now we own cars, but maybe rapidly due to self-driving systems and on-demand services, it could be public as well. Do we accept that or not? Well, and of course, be sharp on the labor market. We have a lot of projects because we do not believe in just talking about it, but also practicing what we preach. We have a couple of things we work on, agreements with Airbnb, you probably heard of, but also really projects to include maybe the not so hipster people in cities. The hipster economy is really this phrase, something it's overlapping the sharing economy, but it's also about getting all the people involved, also the people on welfare and the elderly, because they can benefit as well. So that's about the social inclusion. We love to share our knowledge. We started in last May with a sharing city-to-city roundtable, and we were happy to host a lot of people from different places of the world even. And today the network is even growing because Bologna is already also involved since this lunch. So we love to grow as cities because we need to exchange knowledge on local level to be able to negotiate on global level with the larger players. We drafted up some guiding principles about social, sorry, I'm over time already, I know, social security, on safety, sustainability, inclusiveness, and data sharing. And is my last slide, and it's about the key insights we have, because I want to encourage cities and city governments to stay open-minded for this new approach, open-minded to this disruptive innovations, because some things are already out there, and we'd be better co-learn with the entire ecosystem than just ban everything and stay in our old role. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, and that was extra.
Brilliant. Thank you. Wow, a lot in there. And the questions are buried here. Lots to talk about what the role of the city council is here. And as we have seen, there's the city councils out there too. There are city councils evaluating what the balance is between enforcing policy to control the sharing economy, or reassembling more proactive ways of trying to create opportunities for new approaches to emerge that can deliver social value and so on. And we have here a really good example of how city councils can support sharing at the local level. Our next speaker is Carre. And he's a project manager at the Kirklees City Council. He asked me to indicate that this is in West Yorkshire. And he has been coordinating a project called Comoodle that enables sharing at the local level. But most importantly, he's got over 32 years working with community projects. So he can give us a really nice overview of how to co-create these projects, these sharing initiatives with citizens, following a community-based approach. Thank you, Dax.
Thanks very much. I just noticed a typo on that slide, actually. I didn't type that. If you look for Kirklees on the map, you won't find it anyway, but it actually has got a K in it, not a C. So I'm Doug Carre from Kirklees Council, and I've come to talk to you about a project called Comoodle, which I guess most of you won't have heard of, and you won't have seen the word before. And again, if you Google it, it'll go straight to our site because it's a made-up word. It's a made-up word for a very new project. And it's all about sharing stuff, skills and space. Earlier on, Peter talked about what can public sector do and add to the mix in the sharing economy. A lot of the work's been done around the sharing economy at the moment. It's mostly been done by entrepreneurs, usually young entrepreneurs, business-minded people. And we were trying to think as a council, what can we do with all the stuff we've got? We've got huge amounts of land, buildings, vehicles, staff, skills. If you mix us in with the university, the health professionals, police, fire services, all the rest of the public sector, the prisons, then we've got even more resources to go at. And we tend to lock those things away and not let people borrow them. So back in 2014, we entered a thing called the Mayor's Challenge, funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. And we were lucky enough to become runners-up in that competition and got $1 million equivalent over 3 years. So we're in the second year of that. And really what Mayor Bloomberg was all about was trying to find big ideas that had changed the world. They've just published a document recently called Big Ideas. And they liked what we were talking about. We weren't really sure how we were going to solve the problem, but we pitched the problem. So what were our ideas all about? You can read it there. It's really about trying to create a different culture where we get people sharing things. And we're also about not sharing things from an individual benefit, but all about community projects and things that add value, which is a lot of the focus for this conference. We're also interested in not only looking at stuff, because a lot of the focus is always about equipment and tools and things like that, but also looking at spaces, which are increasingly precious. I was talking to a person who's organised this conference about how hard it is to find even space in London for events like this. So how can we get better at sharing spaces, and also how can we look at skills? So we as a council are basically looking at how we can do that through this project called Comoodle. And we're also trying to now involve other local organisations to get them to share their equipment with others too. But a lot of this will only work if we really got a good understanding of what's available and what we can offer each other. I apologise, all these slides are pink because we have got other colours. We've got an orange and a green that we use as part of our logos, but all these slides we've put on pink. We've got a guy here today actually called Andy from UMI, and we're working with them to develop a platform. If you go to the website at the moment, you'll see what's effectively a blog site that's got a bit of functionality. But ultimately, this will be a platform like PAB, like so many of the other platforms that are out there, where you'll be able to look at things, decide what you want, make a pitch, make a request, and communicate with people. That slide looks dreadful to me. Can you see a better version of it there? Just a quick story about something that we've done recently. You can see there at the top there's a picture of a council van. We're now allowing the public to borrow our council vans for community projects. Free of insurance. If they provide a driver that's got a cleanish licence, they can drive away in one of our vehicles for the weekend and use it for moving equipment about. So for this event, they used the van to move some equipment. We lent them some gazebos, we lent them some notice boards. One of the guys was doing a project with a local river with the kids looking for mini beasts in the river, and we managed to borrow from the university in Huddersfield 3 or 4 high-powered microscopes plus various slides about aquatic invertebrates. So through what we were able to support this project with, they're able to reduce their costs, expand their programme, use our vehicle to get things from A to B. And also, that middle picture, one of the women in the team went out and volunteered to work on the project, doing a felting project. So what would have been a fairly small and potentially expensive project in a small village in West Yorkshire, we were able to do at a very little cost by just getting people to collaborate and share things. So some of the biggest challenges that we've still got, one of the problems is at the moment we are still the principal lender. People are still looking to borrow the council's equipment. We found about 3 generators last summer that we lent out to people, but we know within Kirklees there's probably 3,000 generators. So we need to get other people to start to put their resources into the mix so they don't rely on us. We also need to build this Comoodle community. All these platforms rely on this critical mass and getting enough people there on them. And so we've really got to get up to scale and get more people into it. Everything we've been doing to date is like one big experiment. And then we've got to find a way, and I was talking to Dan about this from Peerby in the longer term, about how we actually start to sustain that, how we can get any money out of this to pay for the core services, the back office, the customer services, the marketing. So we've got to try and find a way to actually put some money into the system, although in a sense we're trying to take money out of the system. But it does require some money to make it work. One of the things that you see on all the sharing economy things is we've got this issue about trust. It all relies on trust, people trusting each other. And at the bottom thing there, what we're trying to do in our project is all about increasing community activity. And in order to do that, we need to get people to share. But people will only share if they can connect with each other. And then they'll only share if they can trust those people they've connected with. So those are some of the sort of key things that are really critical to our project. Something that you might be aware of from Rachel Botman's work is this notion of the trust stack, that people have not only got to trust the idea in the sharing economy, but they've also got to trust the platform or the way that's being done. And then as critically, they've got to trust the people who are actually in that space. So do you trust the other people who are there as well to borrow off? And that we're working on our platform in our design to think about how we cover off trust in the platform, trust in the idea, and trust in the individuals. The other thing to take away is this idea about working around your personas, thinking about, we've identified 12 different types of people who might want to be part of what we're doing. So we've got big businesses who want to give stuff away, we've got small little local businesses, we've got big charities, little charities, we've got some individuals, we've got some short-term students that are in for a short period, we've got other people who are connectors and enablers. They all need to do different things with this platform, so we've got to design around those personas. And when anything you're designing, you've got to think who are the customers that you're working with, not just making it work for me as a council bureaucrat, but it's got to work for all the other people that are there as well. So that's one of the key things. And we've developed very elaborate personas. For each one of these personas has been given a name, a bit of a backstory, a background. We're also thinking about what they need out of the project, where they want them to be. But I can make all these things available to you. Anybody who wants to track me down via email or via the group. The other thing we've done a lot of work on is this social value question. Huge amount of work been done up and down the country about trying to crack this difficult nut of social value and how we measure it. And our problem is that we can't do it after the event. A lot of people do measure basically social return on investment. We're trying to get people, when they make the request, to tell us what difference it's going to make. So how many people is it going to benefit? How life-changing is that going to be? Those types of questions. So we're building some very simple questions that we're going to bury in the platform as part of the pitch that people make, that behind the scenes will churn out a figure of how much social value we think we've created. That's really important if we're going to try and get people and council services and others to actually give things to us. And I think this is probably the last slide, nearly. This is a bit of a long story, but I'll try and do it quickly. It's really important that we find ways to say yes and to people and not no buts. As council bureaucrats, we tend to say no to people all the time. We tend to be very restrictive. I went to a session once about how you can use improvised comedy to drive commerce and business. And the power of how improvised comedy works. Somebody starts a story and then everybody keeps on adding to the richness of it. As soon as somebody says, oh, that's impossible, that could never happen, or no, I'm not interested, it just kills the whole energy of the joke and the story. And it's the same with business and business collaboration. It's the same with collaborative economy. You've got to take everybody's idea and think not only how can you support that, but how can you add to that? So yes, that's a brilliant idea, and I can help you by doing this, or I can help you by connecting you with this person. And that's what I keep saying to our projects. We've got to find ways to say yes and to people. So where we are now, just to finish off, we're going to have a soft launch of the platform in early December. You'll see the website change around that time. to become a much more transactional platform. We've got a campaign that's live at the moment about getting more groups to sign up and share things with each other. And the current blog site's still there, and we're still using it, and we're still trading. So that's me, that's our web address. You can track me down. We're interested in collaborating with anybody, and once we've got it working in Yorkshire, we're looking to take it outside and beyond. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Boyd Cohen. Boyd is Deputy Research Director of EADA Business School in Barcelona. For many years now, he's been doing research to help us make sense of the sharing economy. You might have heard about the Sharing Cities Index, for example, which was one of the first indexes that we had to start assessing how smart cities were. Now, Boyd is going to tell us a little bit about his latest piece of research where he has assessed different forms of sharing initiatives and come up with a compass that helps us navigate this hard to comprehend sometimes territory. Thank you, Boyd.
Thanks, Mara. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Mara has her PhD from the UK and is quite bright and has been doing a lot of research in this space too, so hopefully we have time to hear from her as well. She's not just a facilitator of this. I only have one slide. I was here 2 months ago releasing my latest book at LSE Cities, and I had like 40-some slides, and I ran into somebody here is she in here? Who was at that presentation, and she said a little dance. I had like 45 slides. Well, one of those slides is the only slide I'm showing because I've got 7 minutes. So I've got one slide, and I'm going to make it interactive because I'm the last person, and you guys just had lunch, and we've had 4 or 5 great talks, and I don't want to be boring compared to them. So wherever my slide is, if it ever shows up, I don't need to have a clicker because I've only got one. So as Mara mentioned, I did a bunch of research with a colleague of mine who's actually at Leeds Sustainable Research Institute. His name is Pablo Munoz. He and I researched 36 different business models in the sharing economy. And we started out with this idea that there's a sort of utopian version of what the sharing economy is, which is that it's super collaborative, it's all about peer-to-peer, it's optimization of underutilized resources, kumbaya, all this stuff, right? But then this sort of cognitive dissonance looking at everything going on in what supposedly is a sharing economy, which we've heard lots about in this today. And so we said, all right, well, let's get under the surface. So let's lift the hood of business models in the sharing economy based on what people say they think the sharing economy is supposed to be about. And let's actually compare what the prescribed models are supposed to be with the actual realized models in the real world. So we looked at 36 different business models. And what we came up with were 6 different dimensions of decisions that are made primarily by civic innovators or private entrepreneurs when they're exploring what to do with the sharing economy business model. So I'm going to walk through them. Since I have about 7 minutes, now I have 6 minutes, 1 minute per category about. So, well, first I need to explain something. The further out you go on these, towards the outer ring, is sort of what we would call platform capitalism. That is or our friends at Share will call them the platform Death Stars, right? The ones that are trying to take over the planet. And the further you get on the inside, the more they're closer to a platform co-op, which Mayo spoke quite a bit about earlier today. Now that applies for 4 of the 6 dimensions, the ones where you see this sort of movement towards the center. 2 dimensions we discovered under technology and shared resources, we had a hard time discerning that some of the business models that made one choice over the other in those categories were more or less platform capitalist or platform cooperative. So we made them agnostic to either one. So let's talk about those real quick. So technology, tech-driven, tech-enabled, or low or no tech. We can all come up with some good examples. Uber is obviously one of the most famous examples of a hardcore tech-driven sharing economy company. Tech-enabled is almost all of the tech-enabled platforms we've talked about, from PeerBee to peer-to-peer car sharing to virtually any platform that leverages technology but also encourages or facilitates some offline engagement, interaction between people. And at low tech or no tech could be something like the Repair Cafe. There's no technology involved. It's about getting people together at the community level to participate basically in the circular economy. So do the other side of this to get rid of these that are kind of awkward because they're not on a continuum. Shared resources. You have models that look to optimize new resources. So you think about, say, a Zipcar that acquires new vehicles and puts them in different parts of the city. That's optimizing a new resource. You have a new home for use. You think of eBay, or something really fascinating that gets way closer to the platform co-op. If any of you have heard about Open Bazaar. Open Bazaar is like a non-eBay eBay. Open Bazaar is a distributed autonomous organization which is leveraging blockchain technology. By the way, here in London, you have a fantastic incubator space and visionary around blockchain technology, Jamie Burke, who I've interacted with numerous times. They have blockchain technology that facilitates many things, but can't facilitate transactions between peers without an actual company as an intermediary. It's kind of like Wikipedia in terms of like an open source software platform, but instead of sharing knowledge, it facilitates sharing resources between peers without anyone monetizing in the middle. So those are some examples there. Now let's make this interactive. So transaction is another one. You can have a market transaction where you charge market, whatever the market will bear. You can have an alternative transaction where there's either alternative currency involved. By the way, Open Bazaar is currently only using alternative currencies. Or you can have a subsidized model where it's not based on what the market will pay, but what seems fair or what's appropriate. Or you can have a free model. All right, so this is audience participation time. Anyone, Mayo, you have to be, she can answer all these without thinking, so we need some other people to participate too. Good example of a traditional sharing economy market-based platform. Anyone? eBay. Fair enough, right? They work on supply and demand, whatever people look on there, they post whatever they think the most people will pay based on what other people are paying, and they have models that actually give you ideas on how much people will pay. So how do you optimize, maximize how much you can make on the platform? And of course, eBay as a business behind it, as an intermediary, is certainly very profit-seeking as well. One that I always think of, and I know we're not trying to talk too much about them, but Uber, because one of the things that really is painful about Uber is their surge pricing. So they are excessively market-based, right? So an excessive market would say, we will maximize every cent we can get and use algorithms to determine exactly how much people will pay at any given time for whatever service we want to offer, regardless of the impact on society. So there's this famous example that happened a year ago in Australia where there was a bomb in a cafe. And you can imagine there wasn't 300 taxis sitting out the cafe waiting to take one, so everyone starts getting on Uber. Well, Uber's algorithm says, whoa, a lot of people in this neighborhood want to get out of this neighborhood for some reason. So let's charge 10 times more than we normally charge, and we'll get it. And they did. Now, of course, Uber isn't that evil that they say, oh, we're going to put people in harm's way and hope that more bombs go off, because it was all based on algorithms. But the point is they're very excessive market. How about alternative? Well, I already mentioned one, Open Bazaar, because we got to get through this. I'll move to the last one. Free. We heard about free already. We've heard some platforms that are free. Mara? 1 minute. Oh. Mars, tell me I got 1 minute already. All right, Peerby. Peerby started off as a free platform, right, for sharing personal resources. Business approach, profit-driven, hybrid versus mission-driven. You can get the sense of how that works. So different models around sort of your orientation when you start your company. Governance model is really interesting. Many of the sharing economy platforms are very corporate-driven. But then you have options for collaborative, like Peerby actually raised a bunch of money in a crowdfunding campaign. I would call that part of a cooperative business model because they're engaging their user base and actually financing the organization. And then cooperative is towards the platform co-op model or the DAO model, which we talked about. And lastly, on the platform types, P2P, business to crowd, and business to business. So the classical model of a sharing economy is facilitating peer-to-peer interaction, but they're not all that way. Zipcar, they talked about them. They're not peer-to-peer, they're business to crowd. They're a business, they buy a bunch of vehicles, put it throughout the city, and then the crowd is a customer. And then, of course, there are emerging sharing economy business models just between businesses. So like Caterpillar has a sharing platform for sharing of their tractors between their customer base. So in conclusion, the question leading out to you is basically, how can we take a more nuanced look at the sharing economy? In particular, I'm interested in this from the perspective of policy. So if you think about, just take one of these, like shared resources. We talked about vehicles a lot in this discussion already. So we have Zipcar, who acquires new vehicles, and they often negotiate with cities to get spaces allocated at discounted or free rates because they're facilitating sharing within the city. But then you have things like peer-to-peer car sharing in cities. And then you have things like Toyota just launched their own peer-to-peer car sharing, but Toyota's financing the acquisition of new vehicles. So this goes back to optimizing new vehicles. What do you as a city want to encourage? If you actually really want to encourage optimization of underutilized resources for sustainability, as we talked about, then maybe you need to think about more nuanced policy that's not all yes or no, not all black and white, but actually encourage the behavior you want and consider discouraging the behavior you don't want. I think we can get there, and one way to get there is to be a little bit more finite and detailed in our understanding of the business models and which ones we want to encourage and discourage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Woohoo, that's intense, amazing panel. I'm very lucky because I am the moderator, and so I get to ask them questions first. So I would invite you to sit here. Each of you knows what seats you have to take. So the way this is organized is I get 15 minutes to get ask some questions and share ideas with all of you. I'm going to probably direct questions to each of you, but please, the rest you can chip in. And then I'm going to make sure that some time is left for you to also make some questions. So I was interested in, when you were presenting the experience about the crowdfunding initiative, it made me think how so many times we think about the sharing economy, and we talk about it in the broad sense and the broad impacts that it can have. But we know that sharing practices and commoning practices can foster behaviors like altruism, can support social capital and community bonding. So do you think that there could be a relationship between hyper-local crowdfunding initiatives like the ones that you're supporting and fostering this more local sharing economy that creates value at the local level?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it happen already on a local community-by-community basis. I think online platforms are probably accelerating that process. It might have happened 10, 50 years ago through neighbourhood activism or community groups getting together to improve their local space. I think what we're seeing changing in London is that the definition of what a community is possibly more fragmented, more overlapping, more dispersed than what we might have understood as a traditional neighbourhood in the past. And whilst that, I guess, gives community groups the opportunity to access a much wider pool of resources and skills and a sort of wider group of people with a shared interest to make something happen, it also is quite challenging in terms of how representative that community is, and particularly where we're talking about public realm and doing things in public space that have a direct effect on other people, like crowdfunding how to use an area of park is very different from crowdfunding a watch. You know, as soon as there's a kind of opportunity cost to whatever you put in that park. It raises some really difficult questions, I think, about community, which is fundamentally really defined by how exclusive it is. It's easy. The stronger the community group, the clearer it is who's in and who's out. And I think we see our role as the public sector is trying to, as far as possible, counterbalance that, so that we don't just get the communities with the strongest like tech skills and most friends with the most money, and the ones who are more able and more interested in participating, determining what our city looks and feels like. There needs to be a counterbalance in there, and I think that's the role of the public sector.
This is a very interesting topic, the one of inclusion. How do we make sure that the sharing economy and the collaborative practices that we foster are really inclusive? As we know, this is not always the case. And in particular, I think this is something really interesting in the context of the Fab City initiative, because we talk about personal digital manufacturing and maker spaces and Fab Labs. And I myself work, as you know, at the Fab Lab Barcelona. And this, some things need to happen still for more people to become makers and be empowered by all these tools. So how do you think, what do you think is the role of places like Fab Labs and maker spaces in really upskilling, contributing to the development of skills so that people can really contribute in an inclusive way to sharing and in the context of the city?
Yeah. I think they're certainly well set up to do that. And there's there's activity going on now that's proving that they are able to deliver that. So with, at Machines Room, we ran a 12-day course for a group of 20 young individuals living in the local area who were not in employment or training and wanted to understand what a tangible career could look like in the creative industries, because they had never been given access to that type of education before. So that made a lot of sense. I mean, we took Fixperts into it, we paired them with people in the local community, we upskilled them on the machines, we taught them critical thinking and design thinking and all that, and it was hugely inspiring. And for me, it proved that this could be possible, making, you know, smart citizens, like we like to say, people that have the skills and are empowered and feel as though they can take more control over their own life. But at the moment, that's really serendipitous. So it took a relationship, it took us as a Machines Room Fab City entity to create a relationship with a new direction, which is a community space that looks after young people in the area, in order to then reach those young people. So it's kind of, we're in a place now where we need those middlemen to connect us to people who are not the hipster economy, because they just walk in, like all the time. So I think we need to figure out how we can get beyond that. The RSA published this amazing report that said 1 out of 4 people in the UK said that they are passionate to learn more skills so that they become more resilient, but yet only 1% of the population has ever heard of a make space or Fab Lab. And it's like, but that's a space within a community actually designed to enable you to do that. But we're not communicating ourselves properly. And I think there's something about being able to communicate ourselves in a clear way so people can understand what these spaces are. I really admire libraries for that. Like, everyone can walk into a library and it can be anywhere all over the country, and they feel comfortable because they know what to expect. So we need to, I'm not saying make spaces should be libraries, but they need to be able to function in that role a bit more.
Yeah, and there are some initiatives that are increasingly rethinking the library space as a space for making and sharing. And one of the key principles of the Fab City approach is that cities not only collaborate with citizens at the local level to produce locally, but also to share with other cities. And there's this interesting thing that you say, Femke, about sharing and the need to coordinate sharing across cities so that we can tackle this together and we can share best practice and expertise and also be stronger when it comes to dealing with the Ubers and the Airbnbs of their time. And it was cool because you showed that picture, the final picture, where I saw Maya Fuster and people from other cities. And how can we foster the emergence of more sharing platforms? At what stage are cities in terms of sharing to become stronger in the face of the sharing economy?
Well, I think globally the cities are facing similar challenges, and but all the cities are trying to do their utmost to find solutions to keep control in a way. And you see a lot of cities respond differently on these larger platforms. As in this network, we want to discuss it and explore it together, because banning some platforms is not the solution, because this technology will enable another platform and another platform, because we are all connected. So we need to dive deep into what that will do to our cities, and also what we as cities can give back. And there's just one way, because everything is already acting globally, that we learn globally as well. These large platforms, but also these social media platforms, they're global. They're not per se local or cultural. Although what I also really liked, what was shown, is that all the small things together could be really strong as well. And via that network, we can also show what is happening in our cities on really local and micro level, to give that also value in a different way. So it's very much in the beginning. In May, it was the first roundtable to discuss it, and we will continue discussing that in New York in next spring, and hopefully we will learn together also with the platforms, with initiatives, with each other, not just by talking, but also doing like Kirklees is doing.
Yeah, I know that actually, Amsterdam, you have been in touch with Dux before.
Yes.
And actually, hopefully you can give us some insights on one of the burning topics on how to foster a sharing economy, which is designing for trust. I understand that you have followed some design principles, human-centered design approaches to designing for trust. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because that implies that we've solved it. I don't think we've solved it. I think we've realised just how important it is, and the more that we look into it, that we realise how difficult it is, and we realise the way that you build trust. I made reference earlier to the different personas. Some people. The way that we solve it within the platform itself will vary depending on that persona. Some people, the easy way to do it, nearly all platforms at the moment seem to have some sort of star rating system. You see it, and every time you get an Uber ride now, you can rank the driver. Apparently, if the drivers reckon they fall before 4.8, that's tragic. They all want to keep their trust rating really high. That's how eBay resolve a lot of their problems, by people worrying about their trust ratings. Well, that is certainly something that we need to build into our platform, is some way of people being able to rate each other's trustworthiness. Interestingly, I was talking to Dan earlier about Peerby and how they manage, why they've had so few problems. And he thinks one of the reasons is that in the first iteration of Peerby, you literally looked in somebody's eye, knocked on the door, took something off them, and you knew who that person was. So you'd made an immediate connection. As soon as you start to stick things through the post, or it becomes much more anonymous, then probably that opportunity to build that trust and that connection disappears. And my guess is the more that platforms go towards those types of more distant type relationships, it will get trickier and trickier. So we still need to try and keep that issue of keeping it personal. One of the things we're really interested in is that people use our platform to tell stories. So they're not just saying, I want that van, but they're telling me, if I had that van, this is the type of things it's going to do. This is the difference it's going to make. This is the amount of people it impacts on. This is the area it's going to be in. And for some people, they will build that trust because they think, oh, I know that area, or oh, I used to be in the Scouts myself, or I'm really interested in helping the poor. People have different push buttons, don't they, really? But people need to realise, if you're making a pitch to work with somebody, or to have something for free, or to have something at reduced cost, you've got to go out of your way to make those connections, and different things work for different people. So I think how we will resolve it is by having the classic thumbs up, thumbs down, 5-star Johnny, that type of thing, but also a lot of other things where people can say thank you to people can take photographs, people can tell stories, people can celebrate what they've done, because we think that's really what will drive the interest and the return trade to the platform. But it's early days, but if anybody's got any good ideas about how to solve the trust problem, then we're more than welcome to absorb those and work with them.
Thank you. Boyd, you're the last one. I have the trickiest question for you. I think one of the things that we really need to take care of in this discussion between cities and social impact and the sharing economy is the issue of data. There are many cases, different approaches where mayors tell the sharing economy companies, hey, yes, you can come here and operate, but you have to give me the data, because the data that you collect is very important and allows me to better plan how to deploy urban services and so on. And we know that the unicorns have become very strong at collecting large amounts of data and not sharing it, whereas those cooperatives following a more commons-based approach are more likely to not only share the data they collect, but also empower other stakeholders to also act on that data. So what is your take on this? What is you've shown us how there are these different models inhabiting this ecosystem. What is the relationship with data, and what should we tell mayors to do?
Yeah, data is a big question, both in the smart cities and the sharing city space, of course. I actually think that mayors and city councils need to be much more rigorous around this topic. And what I specifically mean is I think they need to be more forceful with the private sector in certain areas. And basically, I think some companies, the unicorns, are really risking their social license to operate in a lot of provinces around the world, a lot of territories, because they're not willing to share data or leverage that data in a way. I don't mean about sharing private data about individual usage, but I mean about on aggregate, these platforms need to. I know some of you know Aaron Sundarajan. He's one of the well-known thought leaders in the sharing economy space, another colleague of mine in the academic community out of New York. And he believes that in the future that this kind of data generated from the private sector platforms will absolutely be by default delivered to cities in some sort of aggregate way for planning purposes. But I'll give a real quick direct example of the part about this that really frustrates me so much. I had a conversation with somebody else very senior in Paris, the city of Paris, about their discussions with Airbnb around a particular issue, which is in France they have a policy that which goes to like how you encourage and discourage. They have a proper policy, in my opinion. It says a maximum of 120 days a year are you allowed to rent your property for short-term rentals. So it's a way to discourage the acquisition of multiple properties, turning them into short-term rentals, and thereby creating a problem with the local housing stock. And so they've gone to Airbnb, the city of Paris went to Airbnb and said, look, we know that thousands of people are violating this regulation that we have just in Paris alone. We'd like you to help us enforce the regulation. And Airbnb, now this was, I spoke to them 8 months ago, and maybe things have changed, but they had multiple conversations with Airbnb, and Airbnb said no. They said no, of course, because there's financial repercussions for them enforcing the regulation. And their argument is that they actually don't want they don't want to disclose privacy data to the city because that's not fair to their users. My argument is you don't even need to do that. How easy would it be to code into their system that a warning gets sent to any person who's renting their property that you've now hit 110 days this year, you have 10 days left. At that 10 days, you're automatically dropped from our platform until next year. That's how easy it would be, right? They don't even have to communicate that to the city, but they don't want to do it. So I think in the future, if the private sector is unwilling, these unicorns and these private sector platforms are unwilling to go to that level, which they need to do, I don't think they should have a license to operate in that city, and they should be eliminated from you. So you're either going to share aggregate data or ensure that regulations are being adhered to, or you no longer have an authorization to operate in our city.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I have the final 6 minutes to get questions from. They just said 5, but I say 6 because I've taken a bit of your time. So we have a question there, and a question here. If you can please tell us what your name is and your organization, and be succinct with your question.
I'm Edward Hibbert from Freegal, which is about reuse in the UK. And I wondered where social cohesion and social exclusion fits in the sharing economy. You could say that a lot of sharing platforms are a way for affluent people with assets to make money from other affluent people who can afford to then improve the quality of their life. And a lot of people who don't have those assets or can't afford to use those platforms are then left behind. How does that fit in, and what should cities do about it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dax?
I mean, one of the things that's really disappointed me when I come to any of these events is it's very clear the sort of the early adopters are basically the hipster community, really, and the people who are basically making most entrepreneurial gains out of it, people that are basically sweating the existing assets they've got. And coming from an area which has got high levels of deprivation in the north of England, as you might expect, those have got to be the communities that we try and make it work for. And again, when we're thinking about our design and our platform, a lot of people have got smart technologies they carry around in some of these communities, but they don't tend to use it to manage their lives or manage projects like that. And so we're constantly going back to our user research to think, how can we make this work to you? Because the people who can get the biggest gains out of this are the people with the least. And it seems sadly the people who are making the biggest gains at most are people who've got spare castle to rent out on Airbnb. And you know, somehow we've got to try and flip that around somehow. But there's got to be, if you look at in the old days, not going back, you know, a couple of 3 generations or even 1 or 2 generations, the poorest communities were the ones that shared. They shared a pig, they shared a toilet, they shared a washroom, they shared a bakery. All those things are within living memory in the areas where I live, the villages where I live. And that's what we want to try and come back to. But somehow the poorest people seem to really value ownership. And it seems to be a middle class thing to recycle, reuse, pass things around. And how do we sort of flip this around and make it almost cool for the poor to be part of the sharing economy? And that's something we've got to think about and how we message it, really.
I think there's also huge dangers by taking that approach. You know, over the last 5-10 years in the UK, we've seen a massive withdrawal of the state at a local level, a national level, and a lot of social movements, civic initiatives, new forms of sharing economies have really grown in response to the withdrawal of the state. For us, I think there's a real risk in seeing those new emerging technologies or economies taking responsibility for what the state has done in really providing for those most in need, because there is nothing fundamentally democratic or equal about those systems. So we draw a clear line. We're not funding stuff that the state should be doing through our crowdfunding program. That's what the state does. That's what government funding's for. That's what taxes are for. This is for additional stuff that go beyond that. That's not to say they can't benefit people who are in more deprived situations. They should do, and we build that into the way we evaluate, where we decide what we give money to and how we evaluate the impact of our program. But I think by assuming that we can, you know, bringing back a time where people most in need share the most, we're really heading to a situation where the poorest people live in the smallest units and houses and crowd together in tiny flats. Sharing should be a choice, you know, and if you don't want to make that choice, the state should provide for those most in need.
Thank you. Just a tiny.
Yeah, really, really small one, because in Amsterdam we do try to reach out to the poor people to get them acquainted with the sharing economy, because we see that a lot of poor people, they are not so digitalized as the richer crowd. And we do try, together with PRB and together with all kind of other more social platforms, to promote it a bit via our benefit discount card we provide from the city perspective, to show also with narratives of the people themselves to see, hey, if I share my car, I can keep my car instead of selling it by using the neighborhood. So we do try to stimulate certain things.
If you go further, so for example, each Uber journey has a tax that pays bus services. Each each Airbnb makes a donation to affordable housing. There's usually a common link between all of these things.
That is a really good question, but we have to take it offline to Twitter because we have one more question, and we have to give it to the gentleman with the microphone.
And I'm cheating because I've kind of already asked this to one of your colleagues, Finn, earlier. I asked Rajesh if there are plans to create a 5% participatory budget in London. According to my sums, your 1.3 million over 3 years is 0.00025% of the current GLA budget. So I wanted to know, will you help me get that up to 5%?
That's what we're trying to do. We're creating a pilot that creates, there's a huge way to go within big public sector organisations to change our attitude to finance, legal, governance processes, to enable that kind of seeding of power to happen. We're only going to be able to take it step by step, we realise that. So that's why an iterative approach with a pilot that's non-committal initially is the only way to start that process. But I do think there are more fundamental questions to ask about inclusion if you take a larger proportion of the budget, which are things we're going to need to think about.
Fundamental questions. I imagine that a lot of you have a lot of fundamental questions that you would have liked to ask. I encourage you to meet these amazing speakers in the next break, to tweet your questions. It's been a great pleasure to host this panel. Thank you very much for being here with us. It is clear that a lot is going on in the sharing economy, and a lot can be done for cities and for citizens to help tackle urban challenges. That there are a lot of different ways of doing it, and some of these ways deliver more social value, and some of these ways don't deliver a lot of value and keep wealth all together in one place. So it is up to us to decide what type of city we want to live in and work towards that. Thank you very much. Thank you.